I'd love to talk about pride because, as a relatively new queer, I didn't come out until, and I didn't even recognize myself as queer until my mid to late 30s. And I think about that a lot. Like, what would have been different had growing up for me had bi been an option? Yeah, and it's weird. Well, and it's funny because, and I think about now, there's so many things for kids that, I think about Steven Universe, I think about the Owl House, shows where kids are treated to the nuances of queer identities earlier, and that would have made such a difference for me. Oh, that's a thing I can be. Because when you're a little girl and you mostly you like boys, and that, but you also know that there are certain girls that when you're around them, you think that you want to stare at their face all day, and their lip gloss is really nice, and you really like hanging out with them, and I really want to be your friend, but I don't know why. And it's oh, you want to be more than her friend. It's the way that you like little Danny, oh, you also like her. It's the same thing. But yeah, because that's not treated like an option, it's oh, well, that was my thing for years, is every girl thinks her friends are pretty, right? Everybody does. And then when I finally came out to my friends when I was older, first of all, they were like, well, duh. They all knew, they were just waiting for me to know.
Right.
And then but then, I was, thinking back on, yeah, every girl thinks these things about other women, right? And they were like, no. They're like, actually, that's not very true at all. And I'm like, oh, okay.
I
Well,
love
shoot. It's funny. I think it's hilarious. And also I think it's hilarious that it was responded to on formerly Twitter, and I will never call it X because that's stupid. But so one of the many reasons, other than, meeting my wife and ending up marrying her, that I even recognized that I was queer or came out or anything, was I went to see the movie Ghostbusters Answer the Call, which was the all-female Ghostbusters thing that came out with Kate McKinnon. And Kate
um,
McKinnon, I mean, there were other women in it too, but Kate McKinnon was in it.
there are
As
no
Portsmouth.
Kate McKinnon in that movie. There is no other person in that
There's no
movie.
other person in that movie. I don't care. And they're all brilliant. I love Melissa McCarthy. I love Kristen Wiig, but not in that movie. In that movie, it was all about Kate McKinnon and Chris Hemsworth being hilariously dorky as Kevin, the receptionist. And I remember there was one scene where they're in the scene together, and I found myself doing a tennis match. I'm like, Kate McKinnon, Chris Hemsworth, Kate McKinnon, Chris Hemsworth. And I literally sat up in my seat and was like, oh my God, I'm bisexual. In my head, I was like, this is my awakening right here. Sitting next to my wife, by the way, my then girlfriend. Oh no, I think we were married at that point. I forget when that movie came out. But I thought she was an exception. That's how heteronormatively straight deluded I was. I was like, well, I'm married to a woman, but that's just, I'm making an exception for her because I love her, but that's not really who I am. And then I was like, oh no, wait, I want to be in this sandwich. Yeah. So
I'm glad you brought up heteronormative because until somebody pointed it out to me, and then I keep having to point it out to myself, you don't realize how heteronormative things are even now.
I think reminding people that it is a distinct thing with a history. I wish we lived in a world where people's sexualities could be their own business, and you know who you love, who you're attracted to is just one of many things about you, and that's it. But that's not the world we live in yet, and people still need a reminder that not only do all sorts of people exist, but and not only do all those people deserve respect and equal treatment under the law and all of that, but that it has its own rich history and its own, that this isn't new. I think a lot of, I don't know, people act like as if, trans people, non-binary people, pansexual people just appeared out of thin air within the past like 5-10 years. And it's like, no, they've always been here. They've always been fighting, and we have a record of that. And so a Pride Month gives us the opportunity, the same way that, Black History Month, or, Latina, Hispanic History Month, or anything else, gives us the opportunity to focus on it and to remind people, hey, this is a whole thing. It's not just, it's not new, and it's not, the history is important.
Yeah, I was looking at the history of the flag and just how that all came about. And I thought it was just a really great explanation, a reminder that like things are created. Okay. Sorry.
Well, IA plus plus 2S in front of that. It's evolving every day.
Yeah.
But no, not explain in terms of like, well, actually, yeah, explain. So usually how it has come up for me has been in like the teaching space. So when I've been a tutor,
Did you ever have a
there have
chance
been
to
times when,
explain
because you're
anything
talking to the
about
kids, you're relating to
being
them, you're
gay? Not
talking to them about
necessarily
their
yourself,
parents and
but
whatever, this,
being
that, and the
any
other
of the
thing, and things come up.
LGBTQ.
And, I don't particularly hide anything. So I might be telling some offhand, story about my life to relate to something we're talking about in class. And I'll be like, oh, and then my wife said, blah, blah, blah. And then, a kid will never be like, wait, you have a wife? And I'm like, yeah. And usually that's where the conversation stops. But then sometimes, like then different things will come up. And so they know I have a wife. And so, they might ask questions about it, like, oh, so you have a wife? Like, did you always have a wife? Like they're trying to ask like the questions, not knowing how to ask them. Or like, let's say I've talked about having a wife, but then I will, talk about how cute I think, some actor is or something, like some male actor. And they're like, wait, but I thought you have a wife. And it's like, well, I think lots of people are cute. And it's never more than that, but it's one of those things where you see kind of if the kids, and generally like I don't think I've, and if they have, they haven't told me. I haven't worked with kids who have had queer parents, or if they do, I just don't know. But it's usually kids with, a mom and a dad, and who aren't queer, like that neither one of their parents is bisexual or in any way, pan or whatever. And, or that the kids know of, because very often they are. We'll get into that too. But because I do have something, never mind. But it comes up a lot of times with straight kids with straight parents who are not used to having a queer person in their life. And so very often I might be their first queer person that they've ever met. And they're usually like intrigued by that. Like it's not something that they don't like. It's not something that they, because it's something they hear about, in the world. And it's like, oh, I know one now. Like it's almost exciting. Like, oh, now I can say, Miss Teresa is one of those. It's like, yay.
Well, and what you were saying earlier about just seeing things, like that's so important that then if one of their friends or, they have any questions, they know someone who is cool, who is really great. Like they understand that that's just a person.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting too is I have a queer niece, and a lot of my friends' kids, my kids' friends, I have no children. My friends' kids, many of them are queer or trans and have a lot of questions around that. And I tend to be now the person that they come to for that kind of thing. I'm the weird queer aunt that all these kids have in their life to ask stuff, or at least to relate to them. Like my niece was texting me all about how she had a crush on this, non-binary person, of course, and she was a teenager at the time. Now she's in college. I can't believe we're all so old. But when she was a teenager, she was texting me all the drama, the high school drama of like, oh, I like this person and they're not looking at me and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, giving advice, whatever. But, she knew she could tell me about it, because her parents know and they love her and all that, but they're not comfortable with that kind of conversation because they just don't have the experience. And so she knows she can come to me with that stuff and I'll get it.
Very well. But I feel like there's so much there that grown-ups have a lot more obsession over the not the details, but just the whole situation in many cases. And I'm comforted by the fact that a lot of kids I'm meeting don't care.
I was going to say that it's interesting too that like adults do bring their baggage to stuff because like kids will ask a lot of questions, like they're curious, and so they just want to know because they don't know anything about the world. That's their job, is to learn stuff about the world. And sometimes when I've been in this like these teacher situations or these babysitting situations where a kid will like flat out ask me a question like, you know, oh, are you gay, or are you whatever, this, that, and the other, and the parents will immediately be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And it's like, you don't have to be sorry. Like that's not a not legitimate question to ask. Like, I'm not offended by that. And the fact that you think that somebody would be offended by being asked something like that is indicative of other stuff to be looked at, right? Like, and it's the same, you know, because I'm, you know, fat. I've been fatter, and like I'll have kids be like, you know, like I had a kid that I was babysitting be like, why are you so fat? And the mom was immediately like, oh my God, like I'm so sorry. And I'm like, it's okay, I am fat. Like like the kid is just making an observation based on what he's seeing. And I'm like, well, X, Y, and Z. You know, family, you know, makeup, plus I eat a lot of cupcakes and I don't run around that much the way you do. And he's like, am I going to get fat? And I'm like, the way you run around, probably not, because you have so much energy. You're going to be, you eat all this stuff and then you run around and it goes away because you need all that energy. So yeah, it's not, it's interesting how adults process that kind of stuff. And they think like, so my, changing topics slightly, I guess, but sort of related. My wife is trans. And when she's a trans woman, just to be clear, because that's like when you say, like, my wife is trans, she's a woman who is trans. Anyway, that's a whole other podcast, but
We'll do that one.
that'll be a whole other podcast. But so my wife is trans and she wasn't presenting as a woman when I initially started dating her. So I had to tell my family. And, you know, obviously when we were getting married, you know, they have to tell, you know, all the children, you know, all my siblings' children, like what's going on and why we're calling this person, you know, my wife's name now and all of that. And they were so concerned, like, how do we explain it? How do we explain it? And they were just like, you know, she's a woman and now her outside matches her inside. And they're like, cool, okay, so she's TT Ada now. Cool. Okay. Like
Yeah.
they were like all you have to do is explain it. The kids aren't carrying around they're not carrying around what you're carrying around as an adult.
Well, and it's depending on even how old they are too. Like I remember when my kids first realized I had boyfriends before my husband, before their
Yeah.
dad, but they don't have a concept of anything before we were parents.
Right.
And sometimes I don't either, but
I know it's easy to lose. It's like, oh yeah, right. Remember that whole other life?
I know I love it lately when I'm like, oh, I met you and you don't even know my kids. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like you said, they have a lot of curiosity and they just want some kind of answer. The facts is just what they want. I was looking, I was putting together the June calendar and I was like, Pride Month, great. And then I usually like to pair things with books.
Mhm.
Awesome. And I'm like, okay, I have this great book called Who Are You? And then Gender Queer. And then I was like, wait. And I was looking around, I'm like, oh, and I should pair it with this book about the body. And then I decided I wasn't going to bring up pride directly with your body.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that's something to really kind of note. Basically, what I'm saying is that it's always sexualized for many people.
Yes.
I'm curious, like, what if you think there are things that like parents or caretakers can be aware of when it comes to stuff like that?
Yeah. No, and it's interesting to me how, you know, parents can watch like a Disney movie with their kids and watch, you know, princesses kissing princes, and that's fine. And it's seen as romantic and sweet, and it's not sexualized. But then if we saw the same thing happening with two princesses or two princes, suddenly it takes on a different connotation. Like we don't consider princes kissing princesses sexual.
Right.
in the same way that we would consider something else sexual. So it's the same thing. It's not even like trying to keep that away from children entirely. It's keeping a specific version of it away from children entirely. And I think that's something that parents need to first acknowledge, that like that's what you're doing. When you say that queer content is inappropriate, you're very specifically saying that it's this version of romance and kissing and hand holding and whatever. Because, you know, again, what I would have given when I was a kid to see like sweet, you know, tween version, you know, representation of queer love stories growing up, that might have made such a difference to me. And I'm so glad there's more of that now. But I think that the first thing I would recommend is that parents really recognize the stuff that they already let their children watch, and how much kissing is in that, how much hand holding is in that, how much, you know, a boy and a girl like sitting on a couch watching a movie, like cuddled up together. All of those little things that you probably don't even think about when it's straight people. And just say, hey, why does it, you know, why is it a red flag for me when it's two people of the same gender or two people of indeterminate genders? You know, like, why does that bother me when it's the same exact content, just with different people involved? Because, you know, and think about it too, like, you know, back in the day, seeing a Black person and a white person of two different genders kissing was a huge deal.
Mm-hmm.
And people were bothered by that. And it's like, you have to ask yourself why. Because it's not about like appropriateness for children, clearly, because you're already letting kids watch a certain amount of kissing and hand holding and cuddling.
So back to representation for a second. I look at a movie even in the 80s with someone who was trans, and I don't expect for the actor to be true to that role.
Right.
How do you feel about now that people are aware of it, people are talking about it, and more people are getting roles that they have the lived experience with?
Yeah.
So I'm really curious how you feel like that might be helping or not, or just how that's changed the culture and
Yeah.
acceptance.
I mean, I think it's changed the culture hugely. It's like, you know, the same way a show like, you know, Will and
And I
Grace
think it's
or Ellen or
important
whatever, like once
for
you're
people with lived
putting something
experience
into
to be
people's living
cast as
rooms
much as possible, whether it's
regularly,
queer,
it
trans,
changes how they're
disability,
able to view, you know, people
ethnic
in the real
groups,
world,
racial groups,
which is why
whatever,
media is
for
so
two
important,
reasons.
and why like
One,
you kind of can't have it both
those
ways. You can't be
people,
like
oh,
want
media,
to
it's just
act and want to
entertainment.
write
So it
and
doesn't
want to
matter what
direct
I
and
do because people
deserve
shouldn't be listening
employment
anyway or doing
opportunities
this
that
anyway.
they often
But then
don't get
also,
because
you know, like
people
it's it
not
does
from their
matter. It's a
groups
powerful
are
tool,
hired
and how you
instead.
use it matters.
Which, and then, you know, people will say, oh, but there are no trans stars, or there are no, you know, not enough, like this person won't open box office or whatever. And it's like, yeah, because you're not investing in them and you're not creating the stars. And so, of course, there aren't. So that's
By the way,
one. Yeah.
can I just mention that for a second? I always feel like when people say that, I always feel like, yes, what you said, they need the chance to be stars, but they're not, but the people saying that or believing that don't understand that there are a whole other contingent of people that will go see it. That's just short-sighted. I just wanted to point that out in case there's any executive watching.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other reason is that from, you know, and I produce, it's a good business decision in that when you have someone with lived experience, there can be a shorthand. They come in knowing certain things, so they don't need training. They don't need to do research. They don't need to follow a real trans person or a real person in a wheelchair or a real whatever around for a month to figure it out. They just come in knowing it. So you're spending less money. Like it's, you know, in addition to just being, quote, the right thing to do for equity reasons, it's also, bottom line, makes sense for the business. Like, why not have, it's like when you ask on an actor's resume, like, do you ride horses, what are your special skills? You want someone who can already do the thing, so you don't have to train them to do the thing. And lived experience is the same thing. Like, they can just tap into something immediately that it would take somebody else time to learn. And why would you want to do that?
Well, like, anything else with Pride? Like you mentioned a lot of great shows like The Owl House, Steven Universe. You just made me think of Strange World,
Mm.
which
I don't think I've
I
seen that.
it's very odd, but it's super good. And the teenager in it is gay, and it's like so cute flirting. It's like
Mm.
such good animation for the flirting. So yeah, I'm curious what else, if there's anything else that you would suggest for either with kids or for parents that want to learn more, anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I don't know. This isn't, certainly is not for little kids, but for teenagers, possibly, and teens, because that's the age group being represented. I'm a huge fan of The Last of Us, both the video games and the show on HBO. And two things. One, in season one of the show, there's one episode in particular called Left Behind that adapts a DLC from the game, which is like a separate, like, downloadable content that you can, that's outside of the first game, but like is, part of that story, where Ellie, the main character in the game, is interacting with her, quote, best friend and also girl she has a crush on, Riley. And their relationship is so sweet. And, they're having to, shoot it infected and zombies and all that. And it's a post-apocalyptic story. But at its heart, it's this one girl realizing that she has feelings for this other girl. And they share a sweet kiss, and it's really sweet. And then it has like a tragic end, because everything in this world is tragic. And I wouldn't lump this into, like, any killing your queers trope, because one of the queer participants does survive and goes on to have other relationships. But it's her first love experience, and it's really sweet. So whether you're playing the DLC game or you are watching that episode, and again, it's an HBO show, so, but there's nothing like, I mean, it's violent because that's the nature of the world, but if you're willing to watch that with your teen, I would say probably 13 and up, and like you're comfortable talking about violence and stuff, that's a great thing to kind of watch and then talk about. And then in season two of the show, they adapt the second game, Last of Us Part Two, and there's a beautiful queer relationship at the center of that between two 19-year-olds, Ellie and her current love, Dina, that is really great and nuanced, and it's complicated, but it's positive representation.
Yeah, it's complicated. People are complicated.
Yes.
Great. Let me shoot you another Zoom link.
Yeah. And sorry, I babble, that at this point, I
No,
think.
this is what babbling is, why I'm doing this, because I have so many people that are like, I like the articles and everything, but I just want to hear more.
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
well, I have more, and I have friends